boy, and he would beat me.
Being a medieval king was a risky job. Sure, there were battles to fight and assassins to dodge, but the real nightmare? Diseases. These sneaky little troublemakers didn't care about crowns or castles. They could turn a mighty ruler into a miserable mess in no time. And worst of all, no amount of gold could bribe them away. Let's start with our first disease. Leprosy was the disease that medieval kings feared more than anything else. Not because it killed quickly, quite the opposite. This slow-motion nightmare gives you plenty of time to watch yourself disappear bit by bit. Talk about a royal disappearing act that nobody applauded. For kings, leprosy was a double punishment. First came the physical symptoms: skin patches, facial disfigurement, and eventually the loss of fingers, toes, and even noses. Kings who got leprosy went from having people kiss their rings to having people run from their everything. The royal portrait painter suddenly had the hardest job in the kingdom. Should I paint the king with or without his nose? Tough career decision. When a king showed signs of leprosy, whispers spread faster than the disease itself. Court physicians would examine him in secret, knowing their diagnosis could topple a kingdom. These doctors had the ultimate career-limiting move. Good news, Your Majesty. I've figured out what's wrong with you. Bad news. You're fired, and so am I. Because in many medieval kingdoms, a leprous king had to give up his crown. The disease was so feared that false accusations of leprosy became a political weapon. In 1227, rumors spread that King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem had leprosy. While he did actually have the disease, his enemies used it to suggest God was punishing him. God apparently had a very specific way of sending messages to kings, making their noses fall off. Leper kings faced a brutal choice: hide their condition or face exile. Sorry, can't attend the royal ball tonight. I have a kingdom-wide emergency. In my bedroom. Alone. With the curtains drawn. Once discovered, kings were sometimes forced to live in leper colonies, places that made medieval dungeons look like luxury resorts. They went from, Your Royal Highness, to, Hey you, stay downwind faster than you could say, divine right of kings. Medieval people believed leprosy was caused by sin, particularly the sins kings were most likely to enjoy. Kings who enjoyed too many mistresses suddenly found themselves enjoying too many skin lesions instead. Doctors thought it might be caused by eating spicy food or even rabbit meat. Sire, your nose didn't fall off because of bacteria. It was definitely that spicy rabbit stew you had for lunch last Tuesday. One popular treatment involved bathing in blood, which probably just gave you a whole new set of problems. The social consequences of leprosy were particularly brutal for royalty. Medieval law actually declared lepers dead to the world. A king with leprosy was essentially a walking corpse in legal terms. Some kingdoms had special ceremonies where leprous kings would attend their own funeral services before being sent away to isolation. The ultimate awkward social situation, having to look sad at your own funeral while still very much alive. Leprosy hospitals, called lazarettos, were established throughout Europe to house those with the disease. For a king used to palace luxury, these sparse facilities were a shocking downgrade. Most lazar houses had strict rules. Residents had to wear distinctive clothing, carry clappers or bells to warn others of their approach, and were forbidden from eating with or touching the healthy. Kings went from bring me the finest silks to here's your mandatory leper robe and warning bell. The Bible's description of leprosy cast a long shadow over medieval understanding of the disease. Leviticus describes how lepers should be cast out of the community, living alone outside the camp. This religious context made leprosy not just a medical issue, but a spiritual one. For kings who claimed divine right to rule, a disease seen as divine punishment was politically devastating. What we know now is that leprosy is caused by bacteria that damage nerves and skin. It's actually not very contagious. You'd need prolonged contact to catch it. But medieval hygiene made prolonged contact with all kinds of bacteria pretty much guaranteed. But leprosy wasn't the only disease that kept medieval kings up at night. Black Death didn't just take down peasants and commoners. It came for kings with the same ruthless speed. One day, a king would be sitting on his throne feeling perfectly fine, and 3 days later, the royal funeral director would be measuring him for a coffin. What made the Black Death truly terrifying for medieval rulers wasn't just the way it killed, but How unstoppable it seemed. Royal guards could keep out enemy armies, but they couldn't stop infected fleas hiding in the clothes of visitors. Even the best moat in Europe couldn't keep out something you needed a microscope to see. Kings tried everything to escape it. Some fled their castles entirely, abandoning their capitals for countryside retreats. Edward III of England moved his entire court out of London when plague hit. Nothing says, "I'm here for my people," like watching your kingdom burn from a comfortable distance. Others chose to lock themselves away. The royal self-quarantine involves sealing off palace wings and refusing to see anyone who might be infected. Some rulers wouldn't even touch letters or documents without having them fumigated first. Medieval social distancing, when 6 feet apart, meant either staying away from others or ending up 6 feet under. The most shocking thing about the Black Death was the numbers. Between 1347 and 1351, it killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. Some villages disappeared completely. For kings, this meant ruling over ghost towns and empty fields. Tax collectors would return with empty bags because everyone who owed money was dead. Armies shrank because soldiers kept dropping dead on the march. Medieval medicine made things worse instead of better. Royal doctors recommended treatments like bleeding, which only weakened already sick patients. Other brilliant medical advice included drinking vinegar, sitting in sewers to drive out the bad air, and rubbing onions on every surface. Kings paid top gold for medical advice that was essentially, "Have you tried rubbing an onion on it?" The plague created power vacuums across Europe. When kings died quickly from the disease, it often triggered succession crises. Imagine trying to crown a new king when nobody wants to attend the coronation because they're afraid of catching death. Some royal families were nearly wiped out completely, with crown after crown passing to increasingly distant relatives as heirs kept dying. The strangest part? While kings were dying by the dozens, some used the plague for political advantage. When rival rulers fell ill, surviving kings would quickly grab territory. Nothing like waiting until your enemy is literally dying to steal their land. Medieval politics was basically playground rules, but with more crowns and corpses. For all their wealth and power, medieval kings discovered that gold crowns couldn't buy immunity from the Black Death. The disease was the ultimate equalizer. It killed beggars and kings with the same efficiency. Royal blood offered no protection against infected flea bites. Royal reactions to the plague revealed much about their character. Some kings abandoned their people and ran. Others stayed to help, even at risk to themselves. A few were so paranoid they executed anyone who coughed in their presence. Talk about an extreme response to someone forgetting to cover their mouth. While the Black Death might strike swiftly, another royal disease preferred to take their time and add a touch of drama. Enter tuberculosis, the disease that turned dying into an art form. Unlike plague's brutal efficiency, TB offered kings something few other diseases could: time to plan a really spectacular final scene. TB took its sweet time killing you. Kings with tuberculosis didn't just die, they faded away, growing paler and thinner with each passing month. This slow decline gave them plenty of time to get their affairs in order, write their wills, and practice their memorable last words. Nothing says royal like having enough time to audition different people to witness your final breath. The disease came with its own special look: pale skin, bright eyes, and flushed cheeks, features that actually became fashionable. For a while in European courts, looking like you might die of tuberculosis was considered attractive. Kings and queens would literally put on makeup to look sicker. Make me look like I might not make it to dinner, but make sure I still look hot. Tuberculosis earned many dramatic names throughout history: consumption, the White Plague, and the Captain of Death. But its most interesting royal nickname was the King's Evil, though this actually referred to a form of TB that affected the lymph nodes in the neck. Many believed that kings could cure this disease with a simple touch. Yes, you read that right. From the Middle Ages until the early 1700s, people believed that a king's touch could heal TB. Special ceremonies called touching for the king's evil were held where the monarch would lay hands on sick subjects. Hundreds would line up hoping the royal hand would cure them. The king's internal monologue: "Please don't be contagious. Please don't be contagious. Please don't be contagious." The French king, Louis XIV, reportedly touched more than 1,600 people in one session. That's a lot of hands for one king. English monarchs even handed out special coins called touch pieces as souvenirs of the healing experience. Medieval medical care, where your health insurance was literally getting touched by a king. The irony? Many kings contracted tuberculosis themselves, proving their touch wasn't all that magical after all. They could give the disease as easily as they claimed to cure it. Royal courts were perfect breeding grounds for TB with their crowded living conditions and poor ventilation. Add in some stress, lack of exercise, and the general royal lifestyle, and you had the perfect conditions for the disease to spread. TB's effects on royal policy could be significant. A tubercular king, knowing he was slowly dying, might make hasty peace treaties, quickly arrange marriages for his children, or make rash decisions about succession. Some kings, feeling their mortality, became obsessed with leaving a legacy, starting expensive building projects or wars they wouldn't live to see completed. The disease could linger for years or decades. Kings might appear to recover only to relapse months later. This uncertainty made planning difficult. Heirs might spend decades waiting to take the throne, growing old themselves while their tubercular father somehow kept breathing. Talk about an awkward family dinner. So, still king, huh? That's great. While TB gave kings a drawn-out, dramatic exit, our next royal disease focused more on appearance than the final scene. Appearance mattered to medieval kings. A lot. Their faces appeared on coins, paintings, and statues throughout the kingdom. So what could be worse than a disease that attacked the royal image itself? Enter smallpox, the pox that was anything but small in its impact. Smallpox began with fever, vomiting, and headaches. Nothing special in the world of medieval diseases, but then came the main event. Pus-filled blisters that covered the body, especially the face. A king with smallpox went from being the most powerful man in the room to looking like he lost a fight with a beehive. When the blisters finally healed, they left deep, pitted scars that no amount of royal makeup could hide. For kings, this wasn't just a health crisis, it was an image crisis. How could a badly scarred face project power and divine right to rule? The royal portrait artists suddenly needed to develop very creative interpretation skills. Your Majesty, I've painted you with the face you had before the pox, and also added 6 inches of height and muscles you never had. Some rulers who survived smallpox became obsessive about hiding their scars. Queen Elizabeth I famously layered white lead makeup over her pockmarks, which ironically slowly poisoned her. Trading smallpox scars for lead poisoning, the beauty standards were literally killing them. The statistics around royal smallpox were startling. During the 18th century alone, the disease killed 5 reigning European monarchs, but even more royals survived with permanent scarring. In royal courts, where beauty and perfection were valued, these survivors faced a different kind of suffering. Their scarred faces became symbols of vulnerability rather than strength. What made smallpox particularly terrifying was how it spread. Unlike leprosy, which required long contact, smallpox moved easily through royal households. All it took was breathing the same air as an infected person. Being king didn't help when your disease didn't care about social rank. Some medieval treatments for royal smallpox were bizarre by modern standards. One popular method was red treatment, surrounding the sick king with red objects, hanging red curtains around the bed, and wrapping him in red blankets. Your royal physicians have decided that what you really need right now is more red. That'll be 10,000 gold pieces, please. Others tried bloodletting, hot baths, and various herbal remedies. None worked. What did finally help was an early form of vaccination. In the 1700s, people discovered that deliberately infecting someone with a small amount of smallpox material could prevent a more serious case later. The disease so terrorized royal families that when vaccination became available, many kings and queens lined up to get protected, sometimes braver about taking a new medical treatment than their subjects were. A smart king knew that a few days of vaccine discomfort was better than a lifetime of facial scars. Smallpox reshaped succession plans and altered history. When a young royal heir caught smallpox, entire kingdoms held their breath. Death meant a new line of succession. Survival with disfigurement meant a king who might struggle to command respect. Either way, the course of history could change with a single infection. While smallpox attacked from the outside in, changing royal faces forever, another disease preferred to attack kings from the inside out. Let's talk about the royal pain in the toe. While other diseases swept through kingdoms, killing peasants and nobles alike, gout was more exclusive. It primarily targeted the wealthy and powerful, earning it nicknames like disease of kings and rich man's disease. Why did kings get gout more than others? The answer lies on the royal dinner table. Gout is caused by too much uric acid in the blood, which forms needle-like crystals in your joints. These microscopic needles cause swelling and excruciating pain, like someone stabbing your big toe repeatedly with a tiny royal dagger. And what causes too much uric acid? All the foods kings loved: meat, seafood, alcohol, and sugary treats. Medieval kings basically ate their way into disability. More wine, more pheasant, more gout. The royal menu was a recipe for agony. Common people rarely got gout simply because they couldn't afford the rich foods that caused it. Peasants accidentally avoided gout by being too poor to eat like kings, perhaps the only health benefit of medieval poverty. When a king developed gout, the attacks came suddenly. A monarch might go to bed feeling fine and wake up with a toe so painful he'd scream if someone simply walked past his bed, making the floor vibrate slightly. Royal guards received new orders: protect the king from assassins, invaders, and people who walk too heavily near the royal foot. The medieval medical understanding of gout was surprisingly accurate in some ways. Doctors correctly linked it to diet and lifestyle, even if they didn't understand the exact mechanism. Their treatments, however, were less impressive. Recommended remedies included wrapping the affected area in cabbage leaves, applying fresh cow dung, or drinking herbal concoctions laced with toxic metals. "Your Majesty, I recommend we wrap your royal toe in cabbage, cover it with cow poop, and then give you some mercury to drink. That'll be 50 gold coins, please." The physical limitations imposed by gout severely restricted a king's ability to perform his duties. Many gouty kings became less active, couldn't lead armies into battle, or even attend important ceremonies. Some kings were carried around on litters because walking became too painful. They went from leading charges on horseback to being carried around like oversized royal luggage. Historical records reveal how thoroughly gout disrupted royal lives. In severe cases, kings became bedridden for weeks or months. Court painters developed the curious skill of always portraying these kings standing heroically, when in reality, they could barely hobble to their throne. Royal fashion evolved too, with special gout shoes featuring cutout sections to accommodate swollen joints. The most frustrating aspect of gout for kings, it was largely preventable. Simply drinking water instead of wine, eating less meat, and exercising more would have helped enormously. But these lifestyle changes conflicted with what being a king was all about. What's the point of unlimited power if you can't have unlimited servings of roast boar? Gout created a vicious cycle for kings. The pain led to inactivity, which led to more weight gain, which worsened the gout. Many turned to increased drinking to cope with the pain, not realizing alcohol was making their condition worse. The royal physician's advice to drink less was probably the least followed medical recommendation in history. While gout might have been embarrassing and painful, at least kings could openly discuss it. The next royal affliction, however, was so scandalous it was spoken of only in whispers. Syphilis wasn't just another royal illness. It was a royal scandal wrapped in painful symptoms and topped with a bow of insanity. Syphilis first appeared in Europe around 1495, spreading rapidly throughout royal courts. Unlike other diseases, this one came with a built-in accusation. You couldn't catch syphilis from bad air or contaminated water. No, this disease required an exchange of bodily fluids, which meant royal bedchamber activities. Yes, Your Majesty definitely caught this from, sitting on a cold throne. Definitely not from that visit to the brothel last month. The disease progressed in stages, each worse than the last. First came the sores, which a king could hide under royal robes. Then rashes spread across the body, harder to conceal, but still manageable with enough layers. But the final stage? That's when things got truly terrifying. After lying dormant for years or even decades, syphilis would attack the brain, causing dementia, personality changes, and erratic behavior. This created a unique political problem. When a king started making bizarre decisions, was it the disease or just typical royal eccentricity? Court physicians developed a special skill, diagnosing syphilis without ever saying the word syphilis. Royal medical records were masterpieces of creative writing. His Majesty suffers from an excess of, night air. The treatments were almost as bad as the disease. Mercury was the go-to remedy, given as pills, ointments, or steam baths. The toxic metal caused drooling, tooth loss, and kidney damage. This led to the saying, "A night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury." Kings literally dripped with wealth, mercury dripping from their deteriorating gums. Many royal families feared syphilis would taint their bloodlines. The disease could be passed from mother to child, creating generations of infected royals. Some dynasties mysteriously died out or produced heirs with birth defects or mental illness, leaving historians to wonder if syphilis was the hidden culprit. Syphilis affected foreign policy too. Infected kings, knowing their minds might soon fail, rushed important treaties or declarations of war. Others, paranoid from the disease, saw enemies everywhere and executed courtiers for imagined plots. Off with their heads became less about justice and more about voices told me to do it. Royal mistresses developed a new occupational hazard. Being the king's favorite meant wealth and power, but it also meant possible infection. Smart mistresses insisted on exclusive relationships, not from jealousy, but as medieval disease control. Others kept doctors on retainer to check potential royal partners before intimacy. The most bizarre aspect, in later stages, syphilis could cause delusions of grandeur. For kings who already believed they were chosen by God, this was like pouring gasoline on a divine right fire. Infected monarchs might declare themselves immortal, able to perform miracles, or even gods in human form. Court advisors faced the awkward task of gently suggesting that perhaps His Majesty wasn't actually Jupiter incarnate. Public knowledge of a king's syphilis could destroy his reputation. Kingdoms relied on strong dynasties, and what could be weaker than a bloodline tainted by a disease associated with moral failings? Monarchs spent fortunes keeping their condition secret, sometimes creating elaborate stories about why they couldn't appear in public or why they wore gloves at all times to hide their sores. From aching royal toes to secret royal sores, we've covered the diseases that made medieval kings tremble beneath their crowns. These ailments did more than cause pain. They changed history, altered succession plans, and even toppled kingdoms. The greatest enemy many rulers faced wasn't a rival monarch, but the invisible bacteria and viruses that no army could defeat.